I'd like to begin with a couple of questions. How many of you have identified arrogance in your mind in the last week? And how many of you feel confident that you can recognize arrogance whenever it arises? Fewer hands, more or less. Yeah. And just notice, having raised your hand, if there's any uncomfortable feeling or unpleasant feeling that comes along with admitting that we have arrogance. The reason I'm thinking about this is because in the last few months, as the Abbey has begun to reopen, more and more guests are coming to the Abbey. And I find it interesting that 3 or 4 people have approached me and taken me aside and in very hushed tones said to me, "In my practice, I'm recognizing that I have a lot of arrogance." And it's said with a bit of shame and embarrassment, like they're revealing something not so good about themselves. And so I have found this interesting. I also notice this sense of relief that comes over their face when I remind them, well, arrogance is one of the 6 root afflictions. Of course, we all have arrogance. Just like we all have anger. We have moments of anger. We have moments of attachment, moments of ignorance. A clear sense of relief comes over their face. It's almost like it was something that they, something hidden within them that they didn't want to reveal. So here I'm using the word arrogance. I'm following Venerable Chodron's convention of using the word arrogance instead of pride, because in English the word pride has both a positive and an afflicted use. But the word arrogance is just an affliction across the board. So it's important for us to discriminate between arrogance and self-confidence. And self-confidence has both this recognition of our own good qualities as well as an awareness, a clear awareness of some of our limitations and our faults. So there's no reason for self-confidence to overestimate our good qualities. But arrogance is a mental factor that's based on the view of the personal identity that apprehends an inherently existent I and then strongly grasps at an inflated sense of or superior image of ourselves. So over the years, I've had my own reckonings, many reckonings with arrogance, and coming to recognize, especially in retreat, there have been moments where it's like there's been a seismic shift when all of a sudden I see something about myself that I hadn't seen before. And I value those experiences, but they are uncomfortable. I find them uncomfortable. I find them a bit challenging sometimes. And I wonder if this recognition of arrogance often feels surprising and embarrassing and disconcerting, distressing, even mortifying to some people because it has to do with the I. So it's very different than recognizing that I have anger or I have attachment, I have ignorance. Jealousy also has that, a little bit of that tinge, like I think people are embarrassed to admit that they have jealousy. The same thing is true with arrogance. But recognizing arrogance may be especially painful because we relish being right about almost everything, and especially being right about who we think we are. I recently came across a book called Being Wrong by Catherine Schultz, and she says, a whole lot of us go through life assuming that we are basically right, basically all the time, about basically everything. That kind of sums it up. So, of course, we have arrogance in our society. And I also understand that in the monasteries, the monks and nuns in India are very good about calling each other out when they see arrogance to help them, because arrogance has so many disadvantages. So arrogance is often a cover-up for insecurity. You know, it's a defense mechanism to protect a fragile sense of self. So keeping this in mind, I have found for myself that I often recognize, I think I recognize arrogance in others, so then I have to ask myself, oh, and why are you recognizing that? Are they being a mirror for you? So that's a good practice for me. But it reminds me to be compassionate, that this person maybe doesn't feel so good about something about themselves, and I can appreciate that. I can have some compassion for that. I think some people also fear rejection so much that they take on an arrogant attitude. It's like rejecting the other people first so that in case they might be rejected. So that happens sometimes. Arrogance can also show up from actual achievements that we have. We've done something maybe that other people haven't been able to do, but then we overvalue that skill, and that can lead to arrogance. So probably we're aware of some of the many disadvantages of arrogance. Like, it's an affliction. It's part of true origin of suffering. It's going to lead to suffering. It prevents us from learning and increasing our knowledge, since we already think we know so much. And it often causes us to disrespect or denigrate others, especially our esteemed teachers, which further prevents our learning from them. Arrogance disturbs our peace of mind and motivates many different negative behaviors, such as being pushy or rude or disrespectful, boastful, defensive, etc. Many different manifestations. And people don't like to be around arrogant people. So arrogant people are often don't have really good friends. You know, if someone is taking up all the air in the room, why would you want to stand next to them? They won't see you. They won't be able to see you. But as I mentioned in a previous BBC on arrogance, there's a sense of relaxation that can come when we're in the presence of someone who really embodies humility, because that person is already so familiar with their own good qualities in a humble, realistic way, and also aware of their own limitations, so that we can pretty much guess that we're going to be seen honestly by them as well. So how do we become more astute in identifying arrogance? In our studies here, we often look at the 7 types of arrogance that were identified by Vasubandhu and Sangha in their different Abhidharmas. And so just very quickly, thinking that I'm superior in relation to someone who is inferior, thinking I'm superior in relation to someone who is our equal, I'm superior in relation to someone who is better than me. Arrogance that regards our aggregates and thinks I, the conceit of I, that's the 4th one. Arrogance of vanity that thinks we have good qualities we don't have. Arrogance of slight inferiority, thinking we're just a little bit inferior to someone who's actually quite superior to us. And arrogance, thinking that our faults are virtues. You know, we're actually quite degenerate, but we think they're good qualities. And then in the Precious Garland, Nagarjuna delineates basically these 7 same types of arrogance, but he adds an additional one that I think is especially prevalent today in Western societies, and that is the arrogance of inferiority. This is the arrogance of disparaging ourselves and thinking that we are the worst of the worst and that we are useless and incapable. So often when we're thinking we're the worst of the worst, we don't identify that as a type of arrogance, but it is. We can also detect arrogance through psychological terms and behaviors that we notice in ourselves and others. So see if you recognize any of these in yourself. I was embarrassed to find many of them companions. Wanting to be right, having difficulty accepting being wrong or accepting our own limitations, seeing everything as a competition, and being rude and pushy or putting others down while thinking of ourselves as more important, having excessive desire for praise and adoration from others, constantly speaking of or exaggerating our own achievements or abilities, overcompensating for our weaknesses, not recognizing our mistakes, not receiving criticism well, finding it difficult to ask for forgiveness, being intolerant of people who are not like us, talking over others, highlighting when someone else is wrong, in fact enjoying that, being defensive when challenged or criticized, giving off an air of superiority, being self-obsessed and lacking empathy, and being condescending, to list a few. And probably you have your own list of things that you recognize in others when they're, or yourself, when you feel like there's arrogance at play. So the key, I think, is using mindfulness and awareness like we do with all the afflictions, to watch for the arising of arrogance, to apply antidotes when we recognize that they're there. And this also helps us to maintain the values and precepts that we've identified as worthwhile, such as humility and compassion. And then antidotes that come to my mind are thinking about the karmic results of arrogance. Any actions motivated by arrogance can, with the 4 branches complete, can lead to lower rebirth, causally concordant experiences such as being looked down on or taking a lowly station in life, like being a servant to others, being poor, being unhappy, having a short physical stature, as well as easily generating arrogance in future lives. And I'm sure there's some environmental results, I just didn't find them, but maybe we can look for those later. We can also think of all the things that we don't know. So in addition to what the scriptures say, thinking about the 8 constituents, the 12 sources, the 12 links, and all the other subjects that are we find quite difficult, but also in terms of just our modern society and education, we can think of how little we know about astronomy or quantum physics or any of the hard sciences. We can also reflect on the kindness of others, seeing that all of our abilities and talents and knowledge actually come due to the kindness of others that have been willing to help us learn these new qualities. We can contemplate the good qualities of others. That helps us to shift our focus. We can do prostrations, nothing like getting your nose down in the ground, to bring a little bit of humility to the foreground. And remembering our faults in a realistic way, not in an overly critical way, but in a realistic way, really understanding our limitations and faults. So in summary, there's no need to be surprised or shocked or mortified when we recognize, after a while of study, especially studying Buddhism, when we discover arrogance in our minds and our behavior. Instead, we can actively start looking for it and applying antidotes, and knowing that countering arrogance and all the afflictions is really the true path to peace, identified by the Buddha.